ancient gods, Nephilim, fallen angels, the Tower of Babel, and Sumerian religion. These are not just old words carved into stone. They are living echoes of a past that still shapes our world today. The book of Genesis tells part of it. But hidden beneath layers of forgotten mythology and mistranslated history is a deeper story. A sacred one, a broken one, a powerful one. The Nephilim were real, hybrid beings born from the forbidden union of fallen angels and human daughters. They brought forbidden knowledge, spiritual corruption, and chaos. Yet almost every ancient culture remembers them, whether through legends of titans, demigods, or warrior kings. Why? Why do the Sumerians, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Chinese, even the Hawaiians, all carry versions of the same flood story? Could it be that the origin of all religions is not a set of different beginnings, but one truth told in many tongues? In this video, we will explore that truth. You'll discover how Sumerian gods like Anu and Enlil align with biblical accounts, why the global flood was more than judgment, it was divine reset, and how the Tower of Babel shattered spiritual unity into thousands of scattered faiths. You will understand the connection between ancient Mesopotamia, the pre-flood world, and the spiritual forces still influencing us today. And you will feel something shift. A remembering, a return, a healing. Drop a comment if your heart has ever felt that this world holds deeper truths than what you were told. Like this video, if you believe wisdom is hidden in the past. And subscribe to walk with us through mysteries that were never meant to be forgotten. Because this story is not just history, it is prophecy. And you are part of it. Who were the first humans, and what did they worship? In the earliest echoes of time, long before empires rose and scriptures were written, there were people who walked the earth with hearts that remembered the Creator, not from books, but from memory. These first humans didn't invent religion. They inherited remembrance. The book of Genesis whispers of Adam, formed from dust, cradled by breath. But what many forget is that nearly every ancient culture tells a similar story. In Sumerian religion, he is known as Adama, a priest-king, not just a man. In Akkadian tablets, he appears as Ataba, and in the early days of ancient Mesopotamia, he was remembered not merely as the first man, but as the first to walk with the gods. Ancient Sumerians spoke of Nippur, the place where heaven met earth. The black-headed people, as they called themselves, believed they were created by the gods to work the soil and multiply. The echoes are unmistakable. Genesis 2:15 describes Adam being placed in Eden to work it and keep it. Different names. Same divine calling. But these early people did not worship many gods, not at first. They knew the one. They called him by different names: Anu to the Sumerians, El Elyon to the Hebrews, Diaus to the Vedic tribes, but he was the God Most High. They knew him as the origin of all breath, the speaker of light into existence, the one whose word gave shape to chaos. Even before organized religion, there was an intimate knowing, an alignment of soul to source. And yet, something fractured. As families multiplied and spread across the early post-flood lands, from the mountains of Ararat to the fertile plains of Shinar, so did their memories diverge. Some held tightly to the reverence of the One. Others, deceived by power or seduced by strange manifestations, began to exalt other beings, shining ones, sky visitors, hybrid kings. These beings came not with compassion, but with control. They introduced tools and weapons, cities and temples, knowledge that seemed divine, but carried the signature of rebellion. This is where the confusion began. Ancient gods were no longer the reflection of one source. They became many faces, many agendas. From Anu came Enlil and Enki, gods of war, of water, of fate. From the heavens fell the Watchers, described in the Book of Enoch, who taught humans sorcery, astrology, metalwork, seduction. And what was once a shared sacred truth became scattered shards of myth. The Nephilim, born of the union between the fallen and the earthly, began to rule not just as tyrants, but as objects of worship. And the hearts of men turned. Imagine a village in the lowlands of ancient Mesopotamia. Clay homes nestled among grain fields, children playing under the sun. One day a stranger arrives from the mountains. He speaks a language no one knows. He shows how to melt metal, how to shape idols, how to call down lightning through secret names. The villagers are awestruck. They ask, "Are you a god?" And he smiles, but says nothing. That silence becomes the seed of religion built not on truth but on spectacle. We must understand, the first humans were not primitive. They were closer to the source than we are today. Their memories were long. Their spirits still resonated with Eden's harmony. But when knowledge without wisdom came, when the Nephilim offered what felt like power but lacked love, humanity traded reverence for ritual, communion for control. And what do we learn from this? We learn that worship is not just about who you bow to, it's about whose voice you trust. The first humans didn't need temples to know God. They needed truth. But truth is fragile in the hands of pride. And history has shown us, when worship becomes distorted, civilizations crumble. Atlantis fell. Babel scattered. The golden ages of Egypt and Sumer faded into sand. Not because they lacked greatness, but because they lost alignment. Even today, echoes of these first choices linger. Modern spirituality often mirrors ancient confusion. We chase light shows, not light. We crave knowledge, but neglect wisdom. We exalt progress, but forget purpose. Yet the path back is not through more religion. It is through remembering. You are not far from the source. The story of the first humans is your story. Their hunger for connection, their battles with deception, their longing for truth, it lives in your blood. This is not history. It's inheritance. Have you ever wondered why every part of the world remembers a golden time? A time when the divine walked with man, when peace ruled, when the earth responded with blessing instead of thorns. It's because somewhere, deep inside, your spirit remembers Eden. And perhaps what your ancestors lost through deception, you are now called to recover through awakening. Drop a comment if you've ever felt this ache for something purer, older, more true. Do you believe the first humans knew something we've forgotten? Or have we just dressed up old idols in new clothes? Like and subscribe if you're ready to journey deeper, not into myth, but into memory. Because what comes next will shatter what you thought you knew about the fall, about the flood, and about the gods we were never meant to worship. The forgotten kingdoms of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. After the waters of the great flood receded, the world was not empty. It was expectant. The air smelled of fresh beginnings, but the earth remembered. Noah and his family stepped onto dry land with trembling hearts, and the new covenant was born beneath the shadow of the rainbow. From this sacred moment, 3 bloodlines would carry the memory of the old world into the uncertainty of the new, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Each son carried a seed of destiny, but not all would grow toward the light. Shem, the firstborn, walked in the wisdom of his father. From his line came the Semitic peoples, those who would remember the God Most High. His descendants built quietly, carried scrolls instead of swords, and settled near the mountains and plains of ancient Mesopotamia. They became the keepers of remembrance. The ancient Sumerians themselves, though many associate them with polytheism, emerged in part from this lineage, especially through Arphaxad and Elam. The name Sumer is believed by some historians to derive from Shemer, a variant of Shem. The land of Shinar, the biblical name for Sumer, was not a godless place at first. It was a place of memory, a place where heaven had once touched earth. Ham, by contrast, took a different path. His line gave rise to Cush, Mizraim, Egypt, and Canaan. Though blessed as Noah's son, Ham's descendants quickly turned from divine instruction to divine imitation. Cush fathered Nimrod, the founder of Babel and the builder of empires. Instead of worshipping the Creator, they worshipped power. Cities became idols, knowledge became control, and Ham's line gave the world its first global empire, Babylon. But it was built not on covenant, but on conquest. Japheth, the father of the Indo-European nations, spread wide across the north. From him came the Greeks, the Scythians, the Medes. They traveled farther, carried fragments of the story into strange tongues, and wrapped old truths in new myths. In Greece, Shem's descendants remembered the flood through Deucalion. In India, Japheth's descendants remembered it through Manu. Each line took a piece of the sacred and told it in their own way, but pieces cannot replace the whole. The story of these three sons is not just a genealogy. It is a reflection of how spiritual legacy travels. Shem preserved truth, Ham chased power. Japheth explored meaning, and every culture today carries echoes of all three. Which path does your spirit follow? The lesson is simple but sacred. Heritage is not destiny, but it is direction. What we pass on is not just DNA, it is memory. And when a people forget their spiritual origin, they don't just lose their past, they surrender their future. And as these three streams of humanity flowed into the new world, something ancient returned to walk among them. Giants, watchers, the ones who were supposed to be gone. The rise and fall of the Nephilim, demigods or devils. They were not bedtime stories. The Nephilim were real. Born of fallen angels and human daughters, these hybrid beings walked the earth with power unmatched, wisdom unnatural, and hearts untamed. Genesis 6:4 tells us they were the mighty ones of old, the men of renown, but heaven called them an abomination. In the book of Enoch, we are told that 200 watchers descended upon Mount Hermon, swearing an unholy oath to take wives among humans. These angels, Azazel, Semjaza, and their host, were not ignorant. They knew what they defied, but pride blinded them, and from their rebellion came the Nephilim, giants whose size matched their corruption. These beings taught humans forbidden knowledge, how to forge weapons, read the stars, enchant with words, seduce with colors. What was once sacred became manipulated. What was once hidden was exposed and misused. The Sumerians, in their cuneiform texts, praised their gods for bringing them tools, sciences, even architecture. But they did not know, or chose not to see, that these gods were not divine. They were defiled. The rise of the Nephilim was not just physical, it was cultural. They became kings, heroes, legends. In Sumerian religion, in Babylonian epics, in the myths of the titans and the heroes of old, their stories lived on. And with each retelling, their evil became glorified, their violence excused, their wisdom exalted. But God does not forget. As the Nephilim grew in power, The world descended into madness, ritual sacrifices, cannibalism, cities bathed in innocent blood. The Apocrypha speaks of a world where humans worship the children of heaven as gods, not out of devotion, but out of fear. And the Most High saw that every thought of man's heart was only evil continually. So came the flood. The fall of the Nephilim was swift but not final. Somehow, through surviving bloodlines, renewed rebellion, or another descent, they returned. After the flood, we find their shadows in the Anakim, the Rephaim, Goliath, Og of Bashan. Even the Canaanites built cities in their honor. Babylon, Nineveh, these were not just political powers, they were spiritual fortresses. Why does this matter now? Because the Nephilim spirit never left. It lives in systems that value domination over compassion, knowledge without morality, science without soul. It thrives in idol culture, celebrity obsession, and the silent worship of power. We no longer build altars to giants, but we exalt their spirit on screens, in boardrooms, in schools. The rise and fall of the Nephilim is the rise and fall of every age that forgets God. But even then, even in the days of giants, there were those who chose a different path. Enoch walked with God and was taken. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Abraham heard the voice of the unseen and believed. The war between heaven and earth was never just about size. It was about loyalty. It was about the heart, and that war continues, not with swords but with stories. Not with blood, but with belief. Will you remember who you are? Or will you be swept into the myths of men who called themselves gods? Because next came the flood, not just of water, but of mercy, and everything changed. The first flood, global judgment, or local myth. They say water remembers, that it carries the echoes of the world before it drowned. The story of a great flood is not unique to the Bible. It spans continents and cultures, from the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia to the tale of Manu in India, from Deucalion in Greek lore to Nu in Hawaii. These are not coincidences. These are convergences. And if so many nations remember the same flood, we must ask, was it simply a local event, or was it the sacred reckoning of a broken world? Genesis 6 tells us the earth was corrupt, that every thought of man's heart was only evil continually. Not some thoughts, every thought. The world was filled with violence, dark rituals, unholy unions. The Nephilim, giant offspring of fallen angels and human women, had spread across the land. Their thirst for domination, for blood, for forbidden knowledge had twisted creation. What was once good became grotesque. Cities once radiant with purpose now burned with ritual sacrifice. Children were not raised, they were offered. God, in his holiness and mercy, did not destroy out of anger, but out of love. A cleansing, a reset. Not to erase humanity, but to redeem it. Noah was chosen not because he was perfect, but because he still walked with God. In a world gone mad, his heart still remembered Eden. But was this truly a global flood? Consider this. Over 200 flood legends exist across the globe. From the Hopi of North America to the Yoruba of Africa, from the Norse sagas to Chinese myths, all echo the same pattern. A righteous man, divine warning, a boat, a deluge, a new beginning. When cultures separated by oceans share the same memory, the evidence is not just anecdotal, it becomes ancestral. Geological records show sediment layers, sudden shifts, and marine fossils found on mountaintops. Something cataclysmic happened. Now imagine a young boy in the pre-flood world, watching as stone towers rise, As winged beings teach men to make swords, as fires are lit for ceremonies he does not understand. His eyes carry innocence, but his world does not. He hears whispers of war, of sacrifice, of glory promised by the gods. And then, one morning, he sees the skies darken. The earth trembles. The waters rise. He does not understand why, but his soul knows it was not meant to be this way. The flood was not the end. It was mercy in motion. A divine act to stop generations of suffering, to prevent the complete corruption of the human soul. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh, though warped by time, speaks of the gods regretting their decision, of the survivor being blessed. The Hindu tale tells of Manu saving seeds of all life. The purpose was always preservation. The lesson here is not just historical, it is deeply personal. When our world becomes filled with noise, confusion, and compromise, the flood teaches us to return to foundation. That not every storm is meant to destroy. Some are sent to save. Let this remembrance become a mirror for your own life. Are there places in your soul that need to be cleansed? Relationships built on false altars, patterns that need to be washed away. And as the waters receded, something else emerged. A new land, a new sky, a new promise, which leads us to the place where heaven met earth and man dared to speak with gods. Mystery of Nippur, where heaven touched earth. There was a city before Babylon, before Jerusalem, before Rome. A city whose very name means connection, between divine and human, between seen and unseen. That city was Nippur. In Sumerian religion, Nippur was not just a place, it was a portal. The chosen site of Enlil, the so-called king of the gods. A sacred ziggurat stood there, a stairway to the sky, not unlike Jacob's vision of a ladder where angels ascended and descended. It was said that here decrees from the heavens were made. It was here that the destiny of kings and nations was written in stone. But could it be that Nippur was not simply Sumerian myth, but a remnant of Eden's echo? The ancient Hebrews believed in a place where God's presence physically met man. The tabernacle, the temple, the mountain. But before all these, there was Nippur, and the black-headed people, the Sumerians, believed they were created right there, not randomly, with purpose, as male and female, with a command to multiply and steward the land. There is healing in that remembrance, that your life was never accidental, that your design carries intention, that you too were born in the intersection of spirit and earth. The tragedy of Nippur is that its sanctity did not last. Over time, what began as reverence turned into ritualism. The gods of wisdom and fertility were honored not through holiness, but through temple prostitution and sacrificial rites. The sacred became commercial, the divine was distorted. And the very place where heaven once touched earth became the platform for rebellion. Again. And yet the longing for that meeting point never died. Even today, humanity builds towers, skyscrapers, altars, digital spaces, all in a subconscious attempt to return to that first connection. But bricks and algorithms cannot replace presence. Nippur's memory calls us back not to religion, but to relationship. So when we remember Nippur, we are not simply studying a ruin. We are hearing a whisper that you were made for encounter, that the longing you feel is not weakness, it is homesickness. And when man could no longer reach heaven through the heart, he tried to do it by force. Which brings us to the moment when pride tried to build a stairway, not of reverence but of rebellion. The Watchers, forbidden knowledge, and the seven sciences. They came not with swords but with scrolls, not with armies but with allure. The Watchers, described in the Book of Enoch as angels who left their appointed place, descended not to serve mankind, but to seduce it. They taught the secrets of heaven without the wisdom of heaven. And so what was meant for good became a weapon in the hands of broken hearts. Azazel taught men to forge weapons. Penemu revealed hidden arts of writing and seduction. Others brought astrology, cosmetics, the movements of the moon. What sounds like empowerment was, in truth, enslavement. For when knowledge is divorced from divine alignment, it leads to manipulation, not liberation. Sumerian texts speak of the 7 sacred sciences passed from gods to men: architecture, mathematics, metallurgy, astronomy, music, medicine, and language. But these gifts were not neutral. In the hands of men hungry for dominion, they became tools to build empires on the backs of slaves. Cities rose, ziggurats climbed, and in place of altars, there were laboratories of idolatry. Think of the modern world. We are surrounded by marvels, machines that fly, data that thinks, bodies that can be modified. But ask yourself, are we freer, or have we, like our ancestors, traded intimacy for innovation? The lesson of the Watchers is not to fear knowledge, but to steward it. To remember that wisdom is not what you know, but how you carry what you know. That every skill, every science, every spark of brilliance must be anchored in humility, not hubris. A young scribe in ancient Eridu once wrote symbols in clay, taught by a being with shining skin. He believed he was chosen, special, but within generations his writings became the script of conquest, his city the cradle of tyranny. This is the danger of revelation without relationship. And perhaps the most haunting truth of all is that the Watchers are not gone. Their legacy lingers in our systems, in ideologies that exalt intellect over spirit, control over compassion, dominance over divine order. So what must we do? We must return to the beginning, not to ignorance, but to innocence, to a posture of learning, not exploiting, of creating, not conquering, to recover the sciences as sacred, not secular, to lift our eyes not to fallen stars, but to the one who set the stars in place. Comment if you believe some knowledge was never meant to be unearthed, or if you felt the weight of knowing too much without knowing what for. Like if your heart longs to redeem the talents of this generation, not for profit, but for purpose. And so, as the Watchers whispered secrets to men, the Tower of Babel began to rise. But its foundation was not unity, it was ambition. And what came next would fracture the world and faith for millennia to come. The Tower of Babel and the invention of chaos. There was a time when all of humanity spoke one language, not just with words, but with heart. A shared vibration. A harmony that echoed the memory of Eden. They journeyed eastward, and on the plain of Shinar, they settled. And in their hearts grew not gratitude, but ambition. Let us build a tower, they said. Let us make a name for ourselves. But it wasn't just a tower of bricks. It was a monument of defiance. They no longer sought communion with the Most High. They sought control. They no longer remembered that they were created in the image of glory. They tried to become gods themselves. This was Babel. The Tower of Babel was not just architectural. It was ideological, a belief that unity without God could birth utopia, that mankind, by pooling intellect and power, could reach heaven without holiness. And so they built, not with reverence, but with rebellion. According to ancient sources, including the Book of Jasher and writings by Flavius Josephus, it was Nimrod, the mighty hunter, who led this effort. A descendant of Ham and the grandson of Noah, Nimrod turned from the faith of his forefathers and sought to become the first world ruler. He used fear and flattery, charisma and coercion. Under him, city-states turned into empires, and the tower was to be his crown jewel. But what happens when man builds without divine foundation? God descended, not in wrath, but in divine sorrow, and scattered the languages. Suddenly, builders could no longer understand each other. Confusion entered. Division was born, not because diversity was a curse, but because pride without purpose leads to chaos. And so the great ziggurat stood unfinished, a monument not to man's greatness, but to his forgetting. Look around today, at skyscrapers that scrape the heavens, digital towers of endless data, systems built to unify but which often isolate. Are we still building Babels? Are we still trying to craft salvation through technology, ideology, or empire, while leaving behind the whisper of the Spirit? The lesson of Babel is not that unity is wrong. It's that unity without humility becomes tyranny. Real alignment begins not in building up, but in bowing down, and yet even in the scattering, there was mercy. For in the spreading of tongues came the seeding of nations, and the heartbeat of worship continued, even if distorted, across the earth. This brings us to a mystery. How did stories passed down through Noah survive? Why does the Genesis story remain when so many older texts faded? To understand that, we must explore why what came later endured. From Sumer to Scripture, why the Bible came later but lasted longer. Sumerian religion is old. Its clay tablets predate the Torah by centuries. Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Ur-Nammu, all echo stories that sound eerily similar to Genesis. So skeptics ask, if the Sumerians wrote it first, isn't the Bible just a copy? But age does not equal truth, and ink does not equal inspiration. The ancient Sumerians wrote myths and royal propaganda. Their gods were temperamental, petty, battling among themselves for power. Humanity, in their eyes, was made to serve, to toil, to feed divine egos. In contrast, the Genesis account presents a radically different God, one who creates out of love, who breathes life into dust, who walks with man in the cool of the day. The Hebrew scriptures may have been written later, but they carried a different spirit. A cohesive narrative of redemption, a covenant, a promise. The Torah, penned by Moses, was not a cultural tale, it was a divine download. It wasn't just about what happened, but why it mattered. Consider this. Shem, son of Noah, lived long enough to witness generations beyond Abraham. Oral tradition carried stories with precision and sacred trust. The Book of Jubilees even records that angels preserved the timeline. What Moses received on Sinai was not invention, it was inscription. Why did the Bible last? Because it anchored itself not in empires, but in eternity. Kingdoms fell. Libraries burned. Tablets were lost, but scrolls were hidden, preserved, cherished. Even archaeologists today are stunned to find Genesis-aligned events in layers of dirt, in inscriptions buried beneath Ur or Eridu. While the Sumerian religion crumbled with Babylon and Assyria, the word kept moving, from parchment to print, from cave to cathedral. The lesson is timeless. Revelation must outlast revolution. Truth, when divinely breathed, endures beyond dynasty or debate. And so, even after the flood, and even after Babel, evil found new ways to thrive. The Nephilim, those strange giants of old, returned. But how and why? Why the flood didn't end evil, it just changed its face. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. This verse has puzzled theologians and mystics alike. How could the hybrid offspring of fallen angels survive a global flood? Some believe fallen angels descended again. Others suggest corrupted DNA lingered through the wives of Noah's sons. Whichever the method, the result is clear. Evil mutated, but it did not vanish. Post-flood, we see giants in Canaan, Og of Bashan, Goliath and his brothers, entire tribes described as tall as cedars, with 6 fingers, of great renown. The same patterns emerged, cities filled with violence, temples devoted to blood, systems that exalted man and mocked the Most High. What the flood cleansed externally, rebellion tried to rebuild internally. And isn't that the human story? We wash our hands, but leave our hearts unchanged. We tear down idols, only to carve new ones from stone, metal, or ideology. But here's the deeper pain. Many of these post-flood cultures revered the Nephilim as gods. The very beings who brought oppression were now adored. Statues were raised, myths were written, lineages were claimed, bloodlines protected. It's a dangerous thing when trauma is mistaken for tradition. Even today we see it. Celebrities idolized like demigods, power worshipped, rituals disguised as entertainment. The same old spirits, just in modern clothing. But truth heals when it's remembered. The Nephilim teach us that evil doesn't always leave. Sometimes it learns to hide, in compromise, in charisma, in culture. So what do? We awaken discernment. We teach our children not just stories, but the spirit behind them. We don't run in fear, but we stand in light. And that brings us to now. Because the gods of old may have faded, but their influence remains. In architecture, in symbols, in systems, but perhaps their greatest victory is convincing the world that they never existed at all. Which brings us full circle to why all of this matters today. How the first religions still shape your life today. You may not burn incense to Enlil. You may not chant to Anu, but their echoes live in your calendar, your symbols, your institutions. The 7-day week, the zodiac, the pyramid on your dollar bill. The obsession with genetic perfection, with ancient technology, with hidden elites. It's all there, threads from the past woven into modern life. The first religions didn't disappear. They evolved. The gods became brands. The rituals became algorithms. The temples became screens, but the ache remains. That same hunger the first humans felt, to know why we exist, who made us, and where we go after, burns in you too. You were never meant to forget. Your soul remembers Eden, and no flood, no tower, no empire could erase that spark. What do we do with this knowledge? We return, not with shame, but with sacred wonder. We look at the ruins of history, not to idolize, but to understand. We redeem what was distorted. We seek truth, not in popularity, but in presence. This is not about fear. It's about freedom. Comment if something in you resonates, if you've seen glimpses of ancient echoes in modern life. Share this if you believe the stories of Genesis and Sumer, of Babel and giants, are more than myth. Like and subscribe if you're ready to walk in remembrance, not reaction. Because history is not a circle, it is a spiral. And we are being called, not back, but deeper, to remember, to restore, to rise. And now, as the last echoes of the ancient gods fade into the silence of our hearts, we find ourselves not at the end, but at the threshold of something deeper. We began this journey speaking of the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the Tower of Babel, the Sumerian religion, and the untold origins of all religions. But along the way we found something greater than knowledge. We found remembrance. You were never just a bystander to history. You are part of a story that stretches from the dust of Eden to the neon lights of our digital towers. The names may have changed, but the battles remain the same. Light versus darkness, truth versus illusion, spirit versus system. The book of Genesis is not merely a beginning, it is a mirror. The Sumerian tablets are not just myths, they are fractured reflections of what once was. The flood stories, scattered across continents, are not coincidences. They are the weeping of a wounded world. And yet, through all of it, one thing remains: the light. Even in the days of giants and chaos, even in the age of gods that demanded sacrifice and blood, there were always those who remembered. A small remnant who walked with God in quietness. Noah, Shem, Abraham, the humble, the broken, the ones whose faith was not built on temples of stone, but on whispers of hope. You are one of them. You may not feel worthy. You may feel overwhelmed by the noise of this modern Babel we've built, where truth is traded for trends and ancient knowledge is used not to uplift, but to dominate. But inside you is something timeless. A spark that cannot be bought. A knowing that does not need credentials. The same breath that hovered over the waters before the flood now breathes in you. And if this video has stirred something in your soul, if the stories of Atlantis, the Sumerians, the Watchers, and the pre-flood world have helped you see that the war between heaven and earth is not just ancient, but present, then I invite you to stay, not because I am anything special, but because we are in this together, searching, remembering, healing. If you feel this content brings clarity to confusion, light to your darkness, or truth to your wandering, I ask, gently from the heart, if you'd consider offering a bit of energy back. Maybe you've had days where the world felt heavy, and something in this video helped you breathe deeper. Maybe you've been questioning everything, and this story helped anchor you again. If that's true, I invite you, only if you feel led, to help me continue creating spaces like this. A space where ancient truth and spiritual healing meet. A space where the name of God is lifted not with doctrine, but with wonder. Every bit of support, no matter how small, is like a cup of cool water in a desert. It gives me strength to keep digging, writing, and bringing you what others are afraid to say. And if that's not something you can do right now, that's more than okay. Just your presence here is already a gift I treasure more than I can say. Like this video if your heart was moved. Subscribe if you want to walk with me through more forgotten histories and spiritual awakenings. Comment below and tell me, which part of this journey resonated most deeply with you? Do you believe the Nephilim still influence our world today? Do you think the Tower of Babel is rising again in digital form? I want to hear your voice, not just to feed the algorithm, but because you matter. Your thoughts are part of the collective remembrance, and I read every word. Ancient gods may have ruled with fear, but the God Most High rules with love. He doesn't demand your blood. He gives his own. And if you've ever wondered why your soul longs for something holy, something whole, it's because you were made for that love. So wherever you are, on a busy train, in a quiet room, in the middle of a sleepless night, know this: you are not forgotten. You are part of the remnant. You are a light bearer in a world that's forgotten the stars. The war between heaven and earth continues, yes, but you, beloved, are not fighting alone. Thank you, from the deepest part of my being, for being here. Thank you for opening your heart, for listening not just with your ears, but with your spirit. I bless you, I honor you, and I pray that the truth will continue to rise in you like the sun after the flood. And when you see the next tower being built, whether in the form of a system, a screen, or a lie, may you remember who you are and who made you. Shalom. Peace, light, always.